Pignat's corner, beyond Bent. Janssen! And Blackburn Rovers are 18 minutes away from a Premiership return.
As far as Stewart, just outside the penalty area, flips it central for David Dunn. David Dunn equalises. It just had to be. Dax corner and it goes. Glance towards goal, and Rovers have taken the lead. And Charlie Mulgrew has scored his 14th of the season. It may well be the goal that sends Rovers back into the Championship.
Good evening, Rovers fans, and welcome to another live edition of On the Other Side with me, Ryan Hildred from Rovers Chat. I'm delighted to be joining you again on this Friday evening as we preview Saturday's game against Norwich City. It was defeat last time out for Rovers, the first defeat in 8 as we lost 1-0 away to Bristol City. But next up, it is a match against Norwich City in the final of the 3 games that Mowbray has coined the trilogy of games to really see where Rovers are in this playoff reckoning. I'm delighted to be joined by Norwich fan Connor, who, amongst other things, is a reporter for the Eastern Daily Press and has the lucky benefit of being at the game tomorrow. Connor, how are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. Considerably happier now. I've got some food in my stomach. Nice toad in the hole tonight, so that's a nice sort of setup for tomorrow. But yeah, looking forward to it. I think from obviously just had you on our previous show, and from what you said there, as I'm sure we'll get into, it sounds like it's going to be a very entertaining game tomorrow. I hope so. I've probably teed it up nicely for a 0-0 draw.
I'm also jealous of toad in the hole for your tea. I had a freezer tea, I'm afraid, so we had not as good as that. So very jealous. Rovers fans, as ever, please do interact with us this evening in the comments box. Let us know your thoughts as Connor and I chat about the game tonight. And if you are not following us on Twitter, we are Rovers_chat. And if you're not subscribing to our YouTube channel, it's Rovers Chat. Please stay up to date with all of our live content. We are on day 11 of the 12 days of Rovers Chat, so we're nearly at the end. Tomorrow brings it to an end. Day 12, it will be very sad, but then we'll get thinking about Christmas a bit more. But before we start, we are, of course, proudly sponsored by 6yardsout.com. The Rovers Chat YouTube channel is proudly sponsored by 6yardsout.com. They've got retro football from every era with mugs, phone cases and much more. They also have plenty of Rovers goods, including apparel with the famous 94-95 season and this season's kit. Check them out using the link in the description below. Thanks once again to 6yardsout.com for their very kind sponsorship this season. So Connor, let's kick off with the match preview then, if I can. Norwich City are a seasoned yo-yo team, aren't they? It's promotional relegation in 8 of the last 12 seasons I was looking at. And more recently, you went up as champions under Farker 2 seasons ago, relegated last season, and you look well-placed again to make a return and a good go of promotion at least. What's that like as a fan? Do you miss those seasons of mediocrity or stability?
In the Premier League, yes. In the Championship, not so much. I think there is a nice element to it. Obviously, it's not particularly great from an emotional perspective. I think if you probably if there was some scientific study into maybe the heart rates of Norwich City fans, they're probably not too great every season. But no, I think it's enjoyable on the whole. Following a club, it's quite unique as well in terms of it being sort of a county club as opposed to just a city club. So. There's that element to it. It's a really nice sort of family club as well. And you're right. I think there is an element of sort of overachieving as well in terms of maybe the ownership and not having a great deal of money compared to other clubs. I think even now in the Championship, they're down there with Wycombe Wanderers in terms of the money they have to spend. So there's that achievement side to it as well. But does it get boring? Like I said, in the Premier League, everyone wants mid-table mediocrity, and in the Championship, no one wants it. So there's a bit of an element of that. If you ask me next season if Norwich got promoted, I'm sure the answer would be very different. But no, at the moment, it's really enjoyable. Like you say, it's a bit of a roller coaster, but one that I think everyone enjoys on the whole.
Absolutely. And last season, after winning the Championship impressively the season before, it was just 5 wins in the league and you came bottom of the Premier League and relegated. Do the 2 seasons that you had there, you won the Championship and then only got 5 wins and came bottom. Does that show potentially how big the gap is now between the Premier League and Championship, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's not really a shock to me that I think the current top 3 are Norwich, Bournemouth, and Watford, or they certainly were last time I looked, which isn't a great shot. I think particularly this season when we're talking about sort of depth of squad and a schedule like that. So I think the gap is getting slightly bigger in both directions as well. I think it's harder to stay up, but equally when you come down, I think the gap between Norwich and someone in the mid-table of the Championship is getting bigger all the time as well, and we're seeing that now. And coincidentally, I spoke to someone at Norwich last week who kind of felt like even at the moment where they've got double-figure players out, they still feel like they have enough quality to win games against most opposition in this division, and that kind of I think sums up the gap. And of course, parachute payments and stuff have helped create that in the years, but. Yes, certainly in the Premier League, I think when you go up and look at West Brom and Fulham and their fortunes at the moment, I think even if you go up and you spend a ridiculous amount of money, it is becoming increasingly difficult to keep up with those sides that are there, because as Norwich found last season, you can go up with all the will in the world to play this brilliant possession-based, nice style of football, and actually you just come across 11 athletes every week, and they're really physical and they're really strong, and it doesn't matter what style of play you have. If you can't compete with that, as Norwich couldn't last year, then it becomes really difficult for you. And it's no coincidence. I mean, people pick out the Manchester City result from last season, for example, but there's a reason that came against Manchester City and it didn't come against West Ham, for example. It's because of the respective physicality and stuff like that. So it does seem like it's got back there and had a bit more money to spend compared to last season. They would still struggle in terms of challenging sort of the middle of the table. I think it would still be a relegation dogfight. But if you can survive that first season, maybe not in Sheffield United's case at the moment, but if you can, you've got a bit better chance of staying up. And that's certainly the aim for Norwich City now. And that was the aim last year, to be fair, when they got promoted. It was always with the long term in mind. So the long-term plan is still intact, and it's about becoming an established mid-table Premier League club, or failing that, it's about ensuring they're in the top 25 all the time, the top 25 clubs. And at the moment, under Daniel Farke, they're succeeding at that objective at least.
Yeah, and I think with what you've said there, that's a warning shot for Rovers, isn't it? I've often thought about you've got to make the playoffs first and get promoted second, and then the third thing is, well, you got to stay in that division. So a little warning shot for Rovers fans there, I think, if we ever do make it back. So let's talk about your manager, Daniel Farke, Connor. I think he really burst onto the scene when he first took over. I think he joined midway through that first season, didn't he? And then it was his first full season where he got you promoted. I think I'm right in saying that, and got you playing really well. You won the league. I must admit, I fancied Norwich to do a little bit better last season, actually, with how Farke had set that team up and, the Dortmund connections and all of that. He strikes me now, he seems a bit more reserved or a bit less noticeable. Is that the case? Has there been a change in his demeanour or how he's coming across, or is he just not getting the camera now?
Oh, good question. I don't think he's changed particularly. I think maybe there are in the division at the moment. There's probably more household names in the Championship. I think maybe that is it. Norwich aren't a surprise package anymore. They're kind of doing as maybe people expected them to. You look at the top of the table, you see Norwich top, and most people probably look at it and go, yeah, that's probably about right relative to where they are. Whereas last time he came in, he had his first full season in charge. He came in during the summer and then obviously won the league. So he had sort of the title winning season was his second one, and nobody at that point after Norwich City finished 14th, I think, expected them to go and challenge for promotion. But it was the way they did it and the football they played and the amount of points I think they accumulated that made people sit up and take notice and kind of go, well, who's this guy? Whereas now I don't really think he has that. I think he is just that's what people expect of him. So no one's really looking at Norwich with the same eye. In the same way, if it was another club, I think in the mid-table, who suddenly burst and started contending for promotion, I think their manager would probably get a bit more of the limelight. But I think he's happy with that. I think Norwich fans are happy with that. He's missed out on Manager of the Month again this month. So I think Norwich fans would tell you they don't want that curse at the moment, particularly with the injuries. So I don't think he's changed. I think maybe it's to do with expectation and whatnot. But I think he's changed a little bit as a coach from last season, which is probably as expected when you look at the manner in which they got relegated. But in terms of personality, I think he's as charismatic and as quote worthy as ever. But yeah, maybe it's just that he's not sort of overperforming this year.
Yeah, definitely. We've got some comments that are coming through, which I will pick up. So the people that are leaving those comments, I will come back to them. Don't worry as we go through the show. So, Connor, it's been a fairly impressive and possibly unsurprising start from Norwich. Top of the league, 10 wins, 4 draws, just the 3 defeats, and you sit on 34 points. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't think you invested heavily when you were in the Premier League, and I don't think you really lost anyone apart from Jamal Lewis when you came down. So between those seasons, it's remained pretty stable. So with that, is the expectation that you are where you are now? You're going for promotion, you want to win the league, you want that automatic promotion, particularly with the state of the Championship, a lot of teams in transition and flux and dealing with injuries.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly from inside the club, they might not come out and say it perhaps as publicly as you like. I think the closest you get to that is what Stuart Webber said pre-season, where he made clear the aim was to try and get back and to do all they could to try and get back. And I think it's a good point you make there, because the difference with Norwich, and again, you kind of asked about or alluded to the ownership earlier on, and they are always kind of constant financially. They're never really in too much trouble, apart from prior to Stuart Webber's arrival. And they're never really sort of rolling in it. So they're always fairly consistent with where they are financially. And I think that helps because take a club like Derby, you could name several others that kind of fluctuate in and out of trouble. And Norwich don't really ever have that. And that's kind of why they're able to do what they can, because the foundation's already built. It's just about then adding the layers to that and making sure that the product is good enough on the pitch, essentially. And that's where Daniel Farke and Stuart Webber have a lot of freedom. But yeah, I think this year there doesn't seem to be a clear runaway. I think it helps Norwich that the way I look at it, the majority of the division is geared more for defensive sides. I think it's an overly defensive division this year. Ita Karanka, Tony Pulis, Chris Hughton, we could push on. So I think that helps with the style that they're trying to play. It also means they're not scoring as many goals, I think, as they did last time when the division was slightly different. But I do think it is there for them this year. And if you kind of look at it through hindsight and you look at their signings and what they've done, and you're right, it was only Jamal Lewis and Ben Godfrey that they lost really out of those sort of 5 players, including Max Aarons, Buendia and Todd Cantwell. I think you'd say they had a pretty good relegation in terms of how they dealt with it. And they've shaped up in a nice place. I think for me, the challenge was after so much sort of churn to the squad in terms of incomings. And obviously you've seen that in terms of gaining Tom Tribal. It was always going to be about how well they gelled and how quickly they could adapt to Daniel Farke's style of play, which, as I said, has been adapted slightly. So far, so good. I don't think it's quite been as convincing as maybe it looks at times, but they've got the job done and they are where they are, and that's the most important thing at the moment. It's kind of, particularly, as I've said, with all the injuries, it feels like it's important that they keep grinding out results at the moment until they get sort of those key players back in hopefully a few weeks and a few months' time.
Yeah, and you've touched on what I was going to come on to with some of what you said there, Connor. So what's the overall play been like? You know, have you been dominant or have you been fortunate? And has there been any standout results in your eyes?
They haven't blown anyone away this season, which is probably a little bit of a surprise, really. I think the closest they came to that was the 3-1 at Bristol City, where particularly in the first half they were so good, and we saw Marco Stiepermann and Timu Pukki combining, and it was kind of quite reminiscent of a couple of years ago. But in terms of that, I mean, particularly at home, they've kind of struggled past teams. 2-1 against Forest, 2-1 against Wednesday, 2-1 against Wickham, for example. So in terms of results, it hasn't been you wouldn't look at them and think they're spectacular, but they keep finding a way to win games. They keep slipping it into a higher gear for 10 minutes, scoring a goal and then defending quite well. And I think there is an emphasis more on the defence this year. They've signed Ben Gibson from Burnley, which I won't say too loudly on here, but he's kind of shored them up. He's injured for tomorrow, but I think one of their key sort of what they've taken away from last season is that, and Sheffield United have been referenced, and Daniel Farke's referenced it a few times, is that if you come up as a side that look to play good football, it's harder to stay up in the Premier League because there are other teams that do that better than you and will have more quality. If you have a fairly decent base and you defend, then it's probably easier to stay up. And Daniel Farke claims he's got all these statistics and evidence for that. So we'll take him for his word. So I think Norwich have shifted to, they still like the ball. They still like having the ball. They won't look too much different to the side you saw a couple of years ago. But they are, as a rule, touching wood, a little bit better defensively, structurally. And Ollie Skip has been a key part of that. But that for me is kind of the key difference. But yeah, I think it's I think they are looking at this season as being one where they can really sort of grasp the mantle and try and get promoted.
Yeah, and if we move on to the game itself, again, you've touched on some of this. Last time you were in the Championship and then a little bit in the Premier League, particularly early on as well, we saw Teemu Pukki in pretty devastating form as that lone striker, supported by some really excellent midfield options. Is that still the tactical approach that Norwich play with, or what formation have they been tending to play?
Yeah, so it has been a 4-2-3-1, sort of conventionally. I think it's probably less about sort of what Daniel Farke referred to as the base formation and more about sort of their fluidity around that. So it's a 4-2-3-1, but realistically they play with 3 number 10s. So you see those kind of inverted wingers come and look and try and pick up the ball in the half space. Emi Buendia and whether it's Josh Martin or Todd Cantwell tomorrow, I'm not quite sure, but one of those two. So they don't really play with what you describe as conventional wingers with plenty of pace. They'll look to hurt you by playing through you, essentially. And that's kind of where they've struggled a bit this year because teams have, as I said, it's been a bit more of a defensive division and they've had to play against a lot of low blocks that they've had to break down. But the quality really is that they play the extra pass that other teams don't have the quality to play. I think there's a good example against Wednesday last weekend where for Max Aarons' goal, he played it into Vrancic, got a nice flick around the corner, and it was just that extra pass that opened up the goal that allowed them to score, and that's what they're really good at. And sometimes if teams frustrate them well, they can overplay, and I think there's been an example of that. But they will starve teams in terms of possession, and they'll keep the ball. But I always describe possession as being a bit like money. It's all very well having it, but you kind of have to use it effectively. And they haven't been as effective with it as I don't think Daniel Farke was like, and I don't think as effective as they were 2 years ago. But they're still having it, and they're still scoring goals, and they're still creating chances. So, like I said, I don't think it's been massively different in terms of tactically and the way they've set up, but certainly a bigger emphasis on the structure and how they play when they lose the ball and in transition and stuff like that. It's sort of been subtle tweaks rather than big philosophical overarching changes for Daniel Farke.
Yeah, and now's a good time to bring in one of the questions we've had, Connor, from Mark Whittle. How good has Buendia been for Norwich so far this season?
I don't know if I want to give away all the secrets. No, for me, he's the best player in the Championship, which is a big statement. But I really believe that he could be playing for really anyone in Europe, with maybe the exception of the really, really elite sides. I think he's that good. It's absolutely farcical that he's playing in the Championship, if I'm being honest with you. He is a creator. He is really good in tight spaces. He's pretty good defensively as well. I think there was this perception, and there's probably the reason that maybe clubs didn't take a chance on him in the summer, that he couldn't really shoot, but he seems to have added goals a bit more to his game now. There's a willingness to get beyond the ball a little bit more. But his first thought is to get the assist and to find the pass. And I think already he's one of the most creative, if not the most creative player in the division. That's no surprise. I think if he stays around all season, I expect those metrics to grow really, because he's on a different level in terms of the quality he provides. And it's just as it is kind of with you guys and hoping that you keep hold of Adam Armstrong, it's very similar with Norwich and Emi Buendia, because they are such a better team with him in it. Particularly offensively, there were a couple of games where he was suspended and injured and whatnot, and they didn't have the same fluidity going forward. And Teemu Pukki's movements weren't being sort of picked out as usual, and he does provide that. I think he was one of the top creators in the Premier League, which for a relegated club, a team that finished rock bottom, is seriously impressive. And It's absolutely ludicrous that he's playing in the Championship this season. He's kind of Norwich's secret. So and I know their supporters will be hoping that it stays that way, certainly throughout January. But hopefully, if they get back to the Premier League, he'll stick around. But yeah, he's some player, and he seems to be getting better as well, which is quite scary.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we go a bit more into the game then, Connor, away from home, has the approach been to attack sides as much as you would do at home, owing to that quality that you've got, particularly in midfield? I did see it was defeat last time out against a really tough Luton Town side, to be fair, at Kenilworth Road. I think they're not going to lose many at home. I can't see Norwich sitting back at Ewood Park tomorrow. Are they going to come for us?
Yeah, I think so. Daniel Farke would tell you he doesn't have the players to park the bus, so that's not really an option for them. I think their first instinct will be to get on the ball, to try and dictate play, to try and control the game with their quality and whatnot. But I think they have been a bit happier to concede possession on the road than maybe they were in the title-winning season so far. Of course, that can change sort of game to game. You're right. I think the Luton game you picked out was a difficult one. They had a few decisions go against them. There was a crowd for the first time, which I think helped Luton. And it was probably just one game too far in terms of the amount of injuries they had. But yeah, they will look to come and dominate the ball. They will look to attack. They'll look to get at Blackburn. And I think it will come down to how well Blackburn managed to keep the ball as well, because they've not really played too many sides that have tried to sort of dance with them, I guess. They've usually faced teams that try and make it a bit of an arm wrestle and try and frustrate them, and that could lead to something really high scoring, and it could work in Norwich's favour. But equally, if they've got a team that's pretty effective at utilising the space between behind their fullbacks when they are in possession, then it's quite a scary thought, I think, the quality that Blackburn have. So they're going to have to be aware, and they're going to have to be conscious on the counter, but they will look to dominate the ball. And I haven't looked at the statistics, but I'd be shocked if there's any games this season that they haven't dominated possession in. I just think there's been games where they've been more effective with the ball than others, perhaps. So if they can have possession and be effective with it, then I think it could be a difficult afternoon for Blackburn. But if Blackburn can be resolute, take their chances on the counter-attack, or be better at keeping the ball, then Norwich will certainly give Blackburn chances tomorrow. There's no doubt about that. Sure.
Well, that's reassuring. So we've spoken about the squad just a little earlier there, and you retained the big core of that squad that got you promoted last time out, the likes of Emi Buendia, Marco Stiepermann, Todd Cantwell, Max Aarons, Teemu Pukki. These are all good, brilliant players at this level. Who are going to be the danger men for Rovers tomorrow?
Yeah, Pukki, Buendia. I think they're the main two. If they combine, it's pretty scary at this level, I think. I think as you touch upon there, both are probably Premier League players. Max Aarons, if he comes to the party, although he's been a bit up and down, I think his last two games have probably been the best we've seen this season. Todd Cantwell came off the bench on Wednesday and made a real impact, but again, questions over his fitness, so not necessarily sure he'll start. So they're in terms of an offensive one. Josh Martin's one to look out for. He's a really young lad. He's 19. He's kind of having his breakthrough season. He got released from Arsenal, signed for Norwich, and is now sort of in and around the first team. Looks a really good player, but still very raw. And then with Kieran Dow's on the bench as well. Again, he's coming back from a long-term injury, so I wouldn't expect to see too much of him. But there's certainly good attacking options in there. I would caveat that with saying Marco Stiepermann probably has dropped a little bit from the level he was 2 years ago. But look, Norwich have a lot of offensive quality, and everything good they do usually either comes from or starts with Buendia. So that really is the key. It is kicking in, whatever you want to do. But I think teams have had a lot of success when they wind him up because he's got a short fuse, and if he flips, he's kind of one of those players that plays on a knife edge where part of his excitement is that he can get sent off and he can go and 2-foot someone. So if you can get on the wrong side of Emi Buendia, then you've got a good chance of stopping Norwich, I would say.
Would have been the perfect game for Lewis Travis with what you've said there. He's our wind-up merchant, but he's injured, so he's not going to be there winding up Emi Buendia. So that's a shame. And just flipping it then, if you've got any areas of weakness that Rovers can exploit tomorrow, where's that?
Yeah, I think Grant Hanley is, as you will know, is deceptively quick, but Christoph Zimmerman isn't, and obviously Ben Gibson, I mean, he's not the quickest anyway, but if you can get, and I know Armstrong's pretty quick, if you can get in the wrong side of Zimmerman, and Blackburn can work the space well on the counter behind Norwich's fullbacks, then there is a real chance of hurting them. Norwich don't defend well enough for teams not to create chances, so there will be chances. It will then come down to how clinical I think Blackburn are. And like I say, this is kind of a new area because from everything, again, you said on our show earlier and what you've kind of said here, I get the impression that Blackburn are going to try and play against Norwich at their own game, which isn't something we've seen at all this season. Even when they went to Bournemouth, scored 2 goals and defended essentially, or 1 goal and defended. So they haven't really encountered that. So it's going to be quite interesting from that perspective to see how they deal with that. But be clinical because Blackburn will get chances. That is what I'd say. But on the counter attack, those spaces behind the fullback, I think that's probably the key area. If I'm completely honest, in transition, Norwich aren't particularly great. So if you can move the ball forward and move it forward quickly, I think you've got a chance of success in that department tomorrow.
Yeah, I think certainly the counter-attack and getting it forward quickly, particularly if we are having less of the ball and you've come and got possession of it, might be an area where we have some joy. So that's one to watch. Connor, what's your view on Rovers as an outsider looking in and what you've seen in the Championship news and everything like that? You know, what's your thoughts on us and how you think we're going to do this season?
Well, I haven't been surprised that they're kind of in the playoff mix, if I'm honest. I looked at the signings in the summer. I looked at the squad that Tony Mowbray's assembling, and I think year on year there has been signs of gradual improvement at getting Blackburn where they probably deserve to be. This is for me the closest that he's had to that, closest squad to that. I think there is a fear, certainly from my perspective, and like I say, I don't really know the expectations at the club or amongst the fans, but maybe that they get too excited too quickly because, as Norwich have known before, you can have really good squads on paper at this level and get beaten up and get bullied and maybe not have the success that you like because it doesn't really, as you well know, the Championship doesn't really care for egos and that. So I think it's not really a surprise. I probably would say at the moment, if they can keep hold of Adam Armstrong, then they're probably an outside bet for the playoffs. Obviously, if that all changes in January, then obviously it comes with replacing him and how well Bradley Dack does after returning. But yeah, I'm not surprised at where you guys are. I think, to be honest, providing you stick with Mowbray, providing you stick with what you've got at the moment in terms of style of play and squad building and stuff like that, I can feasibly see a situation in 2 years' time where Blackburn are back in the Premier League. Absolutely no doubt about it. Because it's too big a club not to be, and I think you only have to look at the body of work Mowbray has produced since he's been there. Really, it's always been about progression. So patience is key at this level, but it will come, I think, for Blackburn. But this season, if they can sneak into that playoff picture, which I think they could do quite feasibly, and get a taste for the playoff, get an experience for it, and then next year they'll be stronger for that. So if you're asking me right now, I'd probably say a playoff semi-final defeat, sadly. But I think overall that would be a very positive thing for the football club. If you get what I'm saying.
Absolutely, making the playoffs, you've made everyone's day there, Connor. When I was on your show earlier, you said something really interesting, which I think I'm going to ask you to repeat on here if you can, just for the benefit of Rovers fans. So when I was on your show, I was explaining our contract situation at the moment and the lack of cash flow in the club. And I suggested to you that, we might need to consider, regrettably selling someone like Adam Armstrong to get that cash and get those contracts and keep the core of the squad together. Could you just talk to us about the James Maddison situation and how that actually benefited your team and at the time, how gut-wrenching that also was? Yeah,
it was really difficult for Norwich because Daniel Farker came in as manager in that summer and they had a £20 million hole to fill is the best way to think of it. So obviously the parachute payments had ended. They weren't going to be anymore, and Norwich had to think about what they were going to do a little bit differently, hence why they opted to go down the sporting director model, get Stuart Webber, get Daniel Farker, and try and build something a little bit different. James Maddison had been at the club for maybe a year or two, had loan spells at Coventry and Aberdeen. Alex Neil didn't really fancy him or didn't really feel like he was ready. The first thing Daniel Farker did was put him in his team. And over a year, as anyone who watched Norwich that year knows, he scored goal after goal after goal from 25 yards, was far too good for the Championship. His goals pretty much kept Norwich up, and I'm not exaggerating. They pretty much kept Norwich in the division in a mid-table season. But the reality is Norwich fans were watching him knowing that they were going to have to sell him at the end of the season. What Norwich did was got a really good price for him from Leicester, and you can see how he's kicked on. And Norwich fans probably looked at their squad thinking, well, what quality do we have in it now? You know, he was kind of the linchpin of how they attacked and how they played, really. And they recruited again, signed Pukki, signed Buendia, these sort of players that are a bit unknown. Next year they won the title, and I think they were probably better. The fact that their play didn't focus around one man, because everything Norwich City was doing, the tactic was give it to James Maddison, essentially, and see if he can create something out of nothing, and usually he would. So I think once he got taken out of it, I think a few players looked at themselves and thought, okay, Tom Tribal's a really good example. I'm probably going to have to do a little bit more here. And I think as a team, that helped the dynamic, it helped the balance, selling him in the end. And Norwich, the recruitment was obviously key, but obviously the season after, Norwich won the title at a canter, really. So sometimes having to depart with your best player or a player that's very highly thought of, although painful and although it sort of provokes fears about where the club is going, sometimes it can be for the greater good, and it can actually balance the side out a lot more. So it's difficult. No club likes losing a key player, but I think if Norwich fans knew what was coming, they would have accepted selling James Maddison. So sometimes it can work out for the better, is my message. Not always, but sometimes it can.
I think the key thing that you said there, Connor, is who you replaced with, and the good scouting that you did of players like Buendia and Stiepermann and Pukki and others. So Mowbray tells us there is a European network. So let's see if that happens. But yeah, Rovers fans, I just wanted Connor to talk that one through, because I think we're in exactly the same territory. And with the contract situation at the moment, we might have to swallow that bitter pill in January. And if it is for that greater good, then I think the James Maddison situation is a really, really similar story there. So that might be just a little crumb of comfort there, Rovers fans. So, Connor, at this part of the show, I always like to focus on a member of the opposition side who has played for Rovers before. And there's one massive link in Grant Hanley, who you've spoken about. Came through our youth academy, played for us in the Premier League, scored a winner at Old Trafford, and was at us in a really key part of our history as we got relegated, restabilised in the Championship, and didn't quite make the playoffs in the kind of 13, 14, 15 seasons, and then ultimately, went on to the Premier League. We couldn't give him that at that point. How has Hanley played for Norwich since you've had him?
It's been excellent. Yeah, he's been really good. He came in, so to paint the picture, Daniel Farker's about 4 games in, Norwich get thumped 4-0 away at Millwall. People start questioning style of play and whatnot, and whether you can play the style that Daniel Farker wanted to play in the Championship. The next thing they do on the Monday morning is give Newcastle United a ring and sign Grant Hanley for probably, and I don't know if he still is, but he must still be up there in terms of the most they've spent on a player since Daniel Farker arrived at the club. And he's been very, very good in patches. He kind of has a spell where you begin to feel like you're seeing the best of him, and then bam, there's a major injury, and that keeps him out for a few weeks. That happened in his first season. He didn't play for a little while, or he started off quite well, then got injured, then got a massive run in the side on the second half of the season, actually came second in the Player of the Season vote behind James Maddison. And again, that was kind of the same in the promotion year, where had a few injuries, but when he played, got to a stage where he was beginning to look like Norwich's best centre-back, and then would get injured. And again, happened in the Premier League last year. Started off injured, worked his way back into it about the turn of the year, December, January, February time. you're beginning to look at him and think he's a Premier League defender. He's Norwich's best option there. And then he got injured. I think literally as football stopped, missed the whole of Project Restart and missed the start of this season as well. And he's kind of in that stage now where he's beginning to look very, very good again. And I'm sure when I said he was deceptively quick, there were a few people raising their eyebrows a bit. But honestly, ask any Norwich player who's the quickest player at the club, and they will say Grant Hanley. And I had the same response as perhaps everyone else watching this. But he is probably not as good technically as, say, someone like Ben Gibson. But what he is very dominant aerially. He's quite, as you guys know, quite an old school defender, and actually placed into Norwich City's style, that works. He's club captain. He's absolutely loved behind the scenes. He's got a good dry wit about him as well. He's quite a funny bloke. But in terms of what he offers to Norwich's defence and how much he's improved it, he's been, for my money, one of the better signings of this whole era in full. So yeah, he's really good, and Norwich fans really like him, and I'm sure he boosted his credit with Blackburn when he scored that header against Burnley in the FA Cup in January, I think it was.
He absolutely did. And Tom Schofield does agree with you on Grant Hanley, actually, there, Connor. Actually think Hanley was quick, to be fair. Always thought he moved really quick. So, no, you're not alone in that view. And just as a final question before we move on to our predictions, Connor, it's still on Grant Hanley. He started in that game last season, didn't he, against Liverpool, your first game back in the Premier League. Has he become a man you can just really rely on now, particularly at Championship level? You know, he's become that type of, the James Milner type of your squad. You can just rely on Hanley to get that job done.
When he's fit, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's been probably the only question mark. It's how long is he going to stay fit for? And in everyone's mind, I mean, for example, he's not played for Scotland for a couple of years, maybe even 3 years now because of injuries. And it feels like he gets himself back into form, gets himself back into the picture, like it did with the international break where they qualified for the Euros. He was actually called up to that squad and had to pull out again through injury. So that is the only question mark on him really is his fitness, because everything else is superb. Is what I'd call his old school defensive play in terms of how dominant he is in the air, how he blocks shots, how good he is sort of 1v1, his pace as well. But yeah, there's also been an improvement in terms of how he plays out, and I mean he's never going to step into midfield and play out like that. But in terms of his usage of the ball, I think he's a better player in that regard now since working under Daniel Farke. So yeah, really dependable, very well liked, and a real leader in what has been in the past, not necessarily so much this year, but what has been in the last couple of years, a really young Norwich City defence.
Yeah. No, it's good to see him do well. He was a good servant for Rovers, and just it was an awkward time for him to leave us at that point as we were on that downward ebb down towards League One. So good to see him doing well, and hopefully he has a bad game tomorrow. So, Connor, we have reached the part of the show where we will do our predictions on the game. We've both just given our predictions on the show, and I need to remember what I just said to you on your show. But I think I can remember. But Rovers fans, as ever, please do hit us with your score predictions, and we will run through them once Connor and I have given ours. So, Connor, I'm going to come to you first. How do you think the game will go? What's your score prediction?
Well, one part of me thinks two sides that like to play football. I really rate Blackburn as a footballing side, and really appreciate and admire what Tony Mowbray has done. And as we kind of discussed it, I think he kind of breaks the mold really in terms of perhaps what people think of him rather than what he actually is. So I think it'll be a good footballing game. I think it'll be two teams that probably cancel it out, so each other out rather. So I'll probably go for a 2-2. But equally, Norwich keep finding ways to win games at the moment. So part of me thinks to be fairly optimistic from a Norwich perspective and push for a 2-1. So I think I've probably talked myself into a 2-1 Norwich, but I could easily see it going the other way or being 2-2. I think it'll be quite close.
I'm the same as you. I think it's going to be two sides that do go for each other, and I think we're going to be really battling for possession of that football. I'm not sure Mowbray has got us set up to not have the ball, so I think we're going to constantly seek it. You're going to try and get it as well, and I think it's going to be a real similar to the Brentford game last week, actually. And my thoughts about that, I think it's going to be two sides that go. I think Rovers might go for the quick start. again, like we saw against Brentford, that surprised me last week, actually, how well we started. And I think we'll go for something similar. But Norwich are dangerous. You're really, really dangerous. And I do think you're going to score. I also think 2-2. I think we've got goals in us. You've got goals in you. So 2-2 is what I'm thinking as well. So just to pick up the predictions, Mark Whittle has said 1-1, Rovers Norwich. Michael Pearson with a very tongue-in-cheek 7-1, but he's gone for the 1-1 draw in all seriousness. Alexander Haben, I love it, 2-1 Rovers, ambitious. Callum Robinson, 2-2 Armour and Elliott, Pookie at the double. Just to give others chances to get their predictions in just before we finish. There was just one question from Michael Pearson that I saw right at the start. What's the majority view on Delia, Connor? I hear mixed views in terms of perceived ambitions.
How long have you got? Goodness me. I would say probably the majority are appreciative and enjoy having her as an owner. I think there's no doubt about it. Her and her husband practically saved the club. Well, did save the club 20 years ago, and have put in a lot of money. And obviously, the club have had a lot of success in terms of a lot of seasons in top flight football. I think the problem comes when they get up to the Premier League, and the perception is that they don't spend money. They're not ambitious enough. That's the word that gets thrown about a lot. But they are fans of the football club, and there was a nice moment even the other night where they've come over to the fans that are inside Carrow Road, obviously a very limited number at the moment, and come out and applaud them. There's not very many owners. There's not many football club fans who see their owner, let alone see them sort of up close like that. They're at every game. So she's loved in these parts, to be frank. I think there's always going to be that issue of finance, and when they talk about taking her up to the next level, I think the problems will arise if Norwich City get back up and can't stay there, because everything they've preached about being able to do it as a self-financing club, which is essentially, spending what you have essentially, and keeping the books nice and balanced, because they don't put any money in. So they're quite unique in that regard. That it's not that Norwich have a massive debt and they can go and put a check or ask their owners for a check and it'll be put into the club. So that for me is the issue. If they go up and come back down, then I think there's probably a real debate to be had about how far they can go as a self-financed football club. But as a human being, and for what she's done and where we currently sit, she's really well liked in these parts. But like I said, I think that's quite a fragile relationship, as it is with any club and their owners, because even Manchester City want a richer owner than they've got, right? So there's always going to be that. But look, they are where they are. They've done a brilliant job for the football club, and no doubt when eventually that baton does get passed, whether it's to their nephew, who's probably next in line to get it, or whether that's to a new buyer, they'll be remembered as real Norwich City legends and real Norwich City greats. So yeah, she's liked, and she's done a lot more than Lesby Avenue. I'll put that on record as well.
I know, and that's a nice way to finish, Connor. Michael's followed up with another comment here: local and loyal owners, fans, and I think absolutely. When you look at some of the sides who are stuck at League One or Championship level, and the fact that Norwich have had those seasons in the Premier League, you've achieved quite a lot under her ownership. So, what I would add, sorry, is just that, and you're right. Norwich have been down to League One, and they never had what Sunderland have had, or what Ipswich are currently having, for example, where they're kind of arguing about ownership and whatnot. Delia and Michael have always been there. It's always been a constant, and that's always allowed Norwich to kind of build. So that comment's right. I think there is that local element to it, but there's also that sort of little Norwich element to it as well, where people always have these sort of ideas of grandeur. But as obviously you guys know, in the first year with the Venkis, and there's various other examples, I know that they've sort of been much improved in the last couple of years, but you have to be careful. You have to be careful, and that's not to mean you don't do it, but you do have to be careful. And I think the benefit that Norwich City have at the moment is that Delia and Michael won't sell to anyone that they feel wouldn't do the best for the football club. So Norwich fans are in quite a good position. I know that for sure. And whatever happens at the moment is a great example where clubs are on the cusp of going out of business. Norwich City will never be like that. So that, boil it all down, and what they do and how they try and run a football club is completely different to the norm. And I think
probably more widely, probably doesn't get the credit that necessarily it deserves. But as I say, I think eventually the fans will maybe want something a little bit different in terms of owner, and I'm sure one day that will happen. They're getting on a little bit, let's let's not kid anyone, but I think the day they do leave Norwich City will be a very emotional and a very sad day, that's for sure.
Sure. No, great question that, Michael. Thank you for asking that one. So we've had no more score predictions, Connor, so we are going to wrap the stream up right there. So thanks ever so much for joining us and giving us that good insight on Norwich City. Certainly going to be a tough game for us tomorrow, but an entertaining game I am expecting for sure. Rovers fans, if you are not following us on Twitter, we are Rovers_chat. Please hit that subscribe button as well to subscribe to our YouTube content on this, which is day 11 of the 12 days of Rovers Chat. We will sign off day 12 tomorrow with a pre-match live stream as usual, and then our post-match live stream to react to the result pretty soon after the game. So, Connor, as I say, enjoy the game tomorrow. I am very jealous of you being within Ewood Park. Last time I was there was our last home game against Swansea. So you are getting there before we all have. So please go and say hello to Ewood Park from all of us. Enjoy the game. Rovers fans, please do join us tomorrow and give us all your comments. And we will sign out with our message from 6yardsout.com. Goodbye, all.
The Rovers Chat YouTube channel is proudly sponsored by 6yardsout.com. They've got retro football from every era with mugs, phone cases and much more. They also have plenty of Rovers goods, including apparel with the famous 94-95 season and this season's kit. Check them out using the link in the description below.